Hey, greetings everyone from our home to yours. I hope this finds you safe and well. Happy Sunday. Today our scripture passages come from Mark chapter 7 verses 1 through 9. And in our story for today, the religious leaders of Jesus' time, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they were trying to question Jesus as to why his followers and his disciples did not keep the Jewish traditions as the elders of the Jewish religion do. Specifically, they were asking Jesus why his followers, his disciples, didn't partake in ceremonial washings that the traditions called for. They were going out and meeting and brushing up against unclean, dirty people. And when they came back to the temple, when they came back into a religious setting, they were supposed to wash themselves of that dirtiness of the world. And Jesus tells them that Isaiah had rightly prophesied about them and called them hypocrites again. And he says that you disregard the command of God to keep the traditions of men. Then he says to them, you completely invalidate God's command in order to maintain your tradition. Now, this seems like a very difficult thing to say to religious leaders. It seems like something that would cause people to be kind of angry. But how do we put this in today's context? Are we invalidating God's command in order to maintain our traditions? And I would answer to you, absolutely, beyond any reasonable doubt, yes. And you will say, no, we aren't Jewish. We don't have these traditions. We are not invalidating God's command in order to maintain our traditions. Yep, we are, probably every day in some cases. And I like to use the illustration that if you were at church, any church in America, and the pastor was late to the point that he was even late for his sermon, and he walked in and he was dirty and sweaty and nasty and dirt all over his clothes, his suit, if you wear suits at the church you go to, you would, as they say here in the South, have a come apart. Some would get just downright mad. Some would probably want to quit the church, and some would probably shake their heads and then say something to the pastor when shaking, the pastor's hand about how messed up it was, that he would be so disrespectful to God and the Bible and to the church in that way. And that seems harsh, but it happens. And why is that? Why would there be any negativity to that at all? Well, it's because it's our tradition, and our traditions are to come to church, be on time, and be clean. Now, what we wear in church has changed culturally, but when I was a young man, traditionally you wore a suit and tie, and if you were a kid, you wore at least a tie to church. Hence, why clip-ons became popular, in my opinion. But the point that I'm trying to make is that we have traditions in our church. One of the traditions that we have is it's on Sunday, and in different parts of America, you go to church at different times. 10:30, 11 o'clock, some even earlier. You have church on Wednesday nights, you have church on Sunday nights, and those days became sacrosanct, meaning you had to go to church on Sunday night, you had to go to church on Wednesday night. Now, culturally, that has changed, but we still do have a lot of traditions that we have. Now, think about that pastor that I used in that illustration, and think about the pastor and why he was late and why he was dirty and stinky. Well, on the way to his church that Sunday morning, he saw a family with a flat tire. And of course, they were struggling, and it was hot and it was muddy and humid, and they pulled over, the pastor did, and he got out and he helped them change the tire. And so the pastor was being a follower of Jesus. He was doing what Jesus had asked them to do, and that was, to love their neighbor. And, he pulls over being the nice guy and helps them change that tire. And, it's rusted on, and they got to unload the van before they can, whatever you want to add to that story. So it made him later. He's dirty now. He's hot and stinky and sweaty. Now think about this. If the pastor saw them and he said, oh, I'm going to be late for church. I don't have time to mess with this. I'm in my Sunday best. I can't pull over and help them because I got to get to church on time or everybody's going to be mad at me. And that would be a good thing to do. That's kind of a homage to the parable of the Good Samaritan. But what if that family was on their way to that pastor's church and he slows down and drives by after making the decision, oh, I don't want to mess with this. I don't know who they are. I'm just going to keep going. And the sermon that he was preaching that day was about being a good person and helping your neighbor like a follower of Jesus should do. And they noticed, when he slowed down to kind of check them out to see if they, were church people or people that he knew so he could help them or not. And they, or he's speeding by on his way to church and they look, at the car, despondently, regretfully that the car's speeding by, and they notice the license plate on the pastor's car says Pastor D. And when they get to church, parked right up by the doors, closest to the doors as possible, is a big sign that says pastor's parking, restricted or whatever. And there is that car that says Pastor D on it. What is that family going to think? They're not going to think too highly of that pastor, and they're not even going to listen to that sermon about doing the right thing and being a good person and loving your neighbor, because he just proved to them that he's a hypocrite. Now, interesting, the last time I used this illustration, I was late for Bible study and got there dirty and nasty and drenched in sweat and stinky from helping a lady change her tire in a very hot summer day here in Alabama. But my point is that we like our traditions, and our traditions, more often than not, are more powerful than the commands of God in our lives. We like our traditions more than we like doing what God has told us to do. A lot. And it's unfortunately scary true. Think about it. Look into your life and see what are commands from God and traditions of your church. And do they match? So may you go this week and not put traditions over God's commands. Grace and peace to you. God bless you. Have a great week.